The sound of Sarah Mitchell's rifle hitting the ground echoed across the range like thunder, followed by the sharp crack of Drill Sergeant Rodriguez's voice cutting through the morning air. "Mitchell, what in God's name was that supposed to be?" The target at 300 yards remained untouched, pristine white paper mocking her from across the field, while 23 other recruits tried not to stare at what had become a daily spectacle of failure. Sarah stood at attention, her weathered hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. "No excuse, Drill Sergeant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." The words came automatically, practiced through weeks of repetition, while inside she counted heartbeats and calculated wind patterns with the precision of someone who had learned that survival depended on reading the invisible language of ballistics and atmospheric pressure. Fort Williamson's sniper training program had never seen anything quite like Sarah Mitchell. At 32, she was older than most recruits by a decade, her auburn hair pulled back in regulation braids that revealed premature lines around green eyes that seemed to hold secrets nobody bothered to ask about. She had arrived 6 weeks ago with paperwork that listed her previous occupation as hunting guide and a recommendation letter from a small-town sheriff who praised her dedication to community service and wildlife management. What the paperwork didn't mention was why a successful hunting guide from Montana would suddenly enlist in the military, trading mountain solitude for barracks discipline and the quiet satisfaction of providing for wealthy clients for the chaos of learning to kill human targets. Her fellow recruits had stopped asking questions after the first week, when it became clear that Sarah's personal history was as carefully guarded as her emotions. Rodriguez approached her position with the measured stride of a man who had seen every type of recruit the military could produce. But Sarah Mitchell puzzled him in ways that kept him awake at night, reviewing training records and wondering what he was missing. Her physical fitness scores were adequate, her tactical knowledge surprisingly sophisticated, and her understanding of ballistics theory exceeded that of recruits who had grown up surrounded by firearms culture. But when she pulled the trigger, magic disappeared into something that resembled amateur hour at a county fair shooting competition. "Explain to me, Mitchell, how someone who can field strip a rifle blindfolded somehow manages to miss a target the size of a refrigerator." Rodriguez's voice carried genuine curiosity rather than simple frustration. He had watched her during weapons maintenance, had observed the reverent way she handled equipment that most recruits treated as tools rather than precision instruments. Her cleaning technique was flawless, her understanding of mechanical tolerances sophisticated, her attention to detail bordering on obsessive. Sarah kept her eyes focused on the target that remained mockingly intact. "I'm working on it, Drill Sergeant." The response revealed nothing while concealing everything, a verbal deflection that had become her signature defense against questions that probed too deeply into matters she wasn't ready to discuss with people who wouldn't understand the answers. The morning sun climbed higher over the Tennessee hills, casting long shadows across a training facility that had produced some of the military's most effective marksmen over the past 2 decades. Fort Williamson specialized in advanced marksmanship training, taking soldiers who had demonstrated exceptional potential and transforming them into precision instruments capable of engaging targets at distances that challenged physics and probability. The program's reputation attracted candidates from across all service branches, creating an environment where competition was fierce and failure was not tolerated. Among the current class of 24 recruits, Sarah Mitchell had established herself as the undisputed worst performer. Her groupings were measured in feet rather than inches, her shots scattered across target faces like abstract art rather than concentrated patterns that demonstrated developing skill. During practical exercises, she consistently scored in the bottom percentile, her performance so poor that other recruits had begun to whisper about how she had managed to qualify for the program in the first place. The whispers followed her everywhere. In the mess hall, conversations would pause when she approached, resuming in hushed tones that carried speculation about connections, quotas, and the various political considerations that might explain why someone so obviously unqualified had been allowed to waste everyone's time in a program designed for elite performers. The speculation wasn't malicious, exactly, but it carried the casual cruelty of people who couldn't understand how someone could fail so consistently at something that seemed to come naturally to everyone else. Private Jessica Chen, a 22-year-old from California who had grown up competing in junior shooting sports, represented everything Sarah was not. Her groups consistently measured within the width of a playing card, Her scores topped the weekly rankings, and her technical discussions with instructors demonstrated an intuitive understanding of precision shooting that impressed seasoned professionals. During break periods, other recruits gravitated toward Chen's expertise, seeking advice and guidance that she provided with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her abilities. "I don't understand how she's still here," Chen confided to Private Marcus Thompson during one of their evening study sessions. The comment wasn't meant to be cruel, but it reflected the frustration that many top performers felt watching Sarah struggle through exercises that they had mastered within days of arrival. 6 weeks, and she hasn't hit a single target at distance. In civilian training, they would have washed her out by now. Thompson, a former police officer from Ohio who had transitioned to military service seeking new challenges, nodded with understanding that came from experience evaluating people under pressure. "Maybe she's got connections. You know how it is with quotas and diversity requirements. Sometimes they keep people who shouldn't be here because it looks good on paper." The observation carried no malice, just the resigned acceptance of someone who had worked within bureaucratic systems long enough to understand their limitations. The conversation continued around Sarah's absent presence, her struggles becoming a topic of casual discussion that revealed more about the speakers than the subject. They discussed her age, her background, her apparent lack of natural ability, and the various theories that might explain why she remained in a program that seemed designed to expose her inadequacies. None of them considered that someone might have reasons for concealing capabilities rather than revealing them, that failure might sometimes be more valuable than success, or that the most dangerous operators were often those who appeared least threatening. Sarah's living space reflected the same careful anonymity that characterized her public presence. Her wall locker contained regulation items arranged with military precision, but nothing that revealed personality or history beyond the basic facts listed in her personnel file. No photographs adorned her small personal area. No letters from home suggested family connections. No civilian clothes hinted at the life she had left behind. Her footlocker held the standard issued gear, plus a few personal items that could have belonged to anyone. Generic toiletries, a paperback novel about mountain climbing, and a small leather journal that she wrote in during quiet evening hours when others were socializing or studying. The journal entries, if anyone had been able to read them, would have revealed the careful observations of someone who understood group dynamics, individual personalities, and the subtle hierarchies that developed within military training environments. Sarah cataloged the strengths and weaknesses of her fellow recruits with clinical precision, noting who demonstrated natural leadership, who cracked under pressure, who possessed the mental discipline that separated competent shooters from exceptional ones. Her assessments were sophisticated and accurate, reflecting an understanding of human performance that came from sources her official background didn't suggest. But the journal also contained entries that would have puzzled anyone familiar with her training performance. Detailed calculations about windrift and bullet drop at extreme ranges. Sketches of shooting positions that accommodated unusual terrain features. Notes about breathing techniques that maximize stability during extended observations. The technical content suggested someone with advanced knowledge of precision shooting, creating a stark contradiction with her daily failures on the training range. During evening hours, when other recruits gathered in common areas to discuss the day's training or compete in impromptu contests of skill and knowledge, Sarah maintained her solitary routine. She would find quiet spaces away from social interactions, sometimes sitting on steps outside the barracks, sometimes walking the perimeter paths that surrounded the training facility. Her isolation wasn't antisocial exactly, but it created distance that discouraged casual conversation and deeper connections. The few attempts at friendship had been politely deflected with responses that revealed nothing while seeming to share something. When asked about her hometown, she would mention the beauty of Montana mountains without providing specific locations. When questioned about family, she would express appreciation for military service without discussing personal relationships. When invited to join social activities, she would decline with explanations about needing study time or preferring solitude, creating an impression of dedication rather than unfriendliness. Master Sergeant William Hayes had been running sniper training programs for 15 years, long enough to develop an intuitive sense for which recruits possessed the rare combination of technical skill, mental discipline, and emotional stability that separated competent marksmen from true artists of precision shooting. His experience had taught him to look beyond surface performance to identify subtle indicators of potential that might not be immediately apparent through standardized testing and routine exercises. Sarah Mitchell troubled him in ways he couldn't articulate. Her theoretical knowledge was exceptional, her understanding of ballistics sophisticated, her attention to detail during equipment maintenance bordering on obsessive. During classroom sessions, she asked questions that demonstrated advanced understanding of concepts that typically challenged experienced shooters. Her tactical discussions revealed thinking that was both creative and practical, suggesting someone who had considered real-world applications rather than just textbook scenarios. But when she stepped onto the firing line, competence evaporated into something that resembled amateur desperation. Hayes had watched her trigger control during dry-fire exercises, noting technique that was textbook perfect. He had observed her breathing patterns, her natural point of aim, her follow-through, and her recovery between shots. Every element of her shooting process appeared fundamentally sound, yet her results suggested someone who had never held a rifle before arriving at Fort Williamson. The contradiction kept Hayes awake at night, reviewing training videos and trying to identify what he was missing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He had seen recruits struggle with various aspects of precision shooting, had helped hundreds of students overcome mental barriers, technical deficiencies, and confidence issues that interfered with performance. But he had never encountered someone whose theoretical understanding so completely exceeded their practical application, whose knowledge seemed disconnected from their ability to implement that knowledge under controlled conditions. During one of their individual counseling sessions, Hayes attempted to probe deeper into Sarah's background, hoping to identify factors that might explain her performance issues. The session took place in his office, a small space decorated with photographs from successful training cycles and certificates that documented his expertise in advanced marksmanship instruction. "Mitchell," Hayes began, settling behind his desk with the file that documented 6 weeks of failure. "Help me understand what's happening here. Your written examinations are exceptional, your equipment knowledge is advanced, your tactical thinking is sophisticated. But your shooting performance suggests someone who's never held a rifle before. Walk me through what's going on." Sarah sat at attention, her posture perfect and her expression neutral, giving no indication of the calculations running through her mind as she considered how much truth she could reveal without compromising the careful anonymity she had worked to maintain. "I'm having difficulty translating theory into practice, Master Sergeant. I understand the concepts, but execution remains challenging." Hayes leaned forward, his expression reflecting genuine concern rather than simple frustration. In his experience, recruits who possessed advanced theoretical knowledge typically demonstrated corresponding practical ability, even if they needed refinement and practice to reach elite performance levels. Sarah's disconnect suggested something more complex than simple learning curves or confidence issues. "Mitchell, your background lists hunting guide experience, which typically correlates with practical shooting skills. Can you help me understand why someone with your listed experience would struggle with basic marksmanship fundamentals?" The question was carefully phrased to encourage honest discussion while avoiding accusations or implications that might cause her to become more defensive. Sarah's response revealed nothing while appearing to be completely forthcoming. "My civilian experience was primarily focused on wildlife behavior and outdoor skills, Master Sergeant. The shooting requirements were different from military precision standards. I'm adapting to new expectations and more demanding accuracy requirements." The explanation was plausible but incomplete, leaving Hayes with the impression that important information was being withheld. He had worked with civilian hunters before, many of whom required significant adjustment to military shooting techniques, but their struggles typically involved mechanical differences rather than fundamental inability to hit targets at moderate distances. The session continued for another 20 minutes, with Hayes attempting to identify specific technical issues that might explain Sarah's performance while Sarah deflected each probe with responses that seemed helpful while revealing nothing substantial. By the end of their discussion, Hayes was more puzzled than when they had started, sensing that he was dealing with someone whose motivations and capabilities remained carefully hidden behind a facade of earnest incompetence. The training schedule at Fort Williamson was designed to progressively build skills through increasingly challenging exercises that tested both technical ability and mental resilience. Recruits began with fundamental marksmanship at known distances, then advanced through stalking exercises, camouflage techniques, observation skills, And finally, complex scenarios that simulated real-world operational requirements. The progression was logical and systematic, building competence through repetition and refinement. Sarah's performance remained consistently poor across all phases of training. During stalking exercises, she would be detected by instructors who spotted obvious mistakes in camouflage placement and movement techniques. Her observation reports lacked the detail and accuracy that separated competent scouts from exceptional ones. Her range estimation skills seemed to depend on guesswork rather than systematic techniques that other recruits had mastered within their first weeks of training. The consistency of her failure began to create ripple effects throughout the training program. Other recruits, initially sympathetic to her struggles, became increasingly frustrated with group exercises that were slowed or complicated by her inadequate performance. Instructors found themselves spending disproportionate amounts of time addressing her deficiencies, while advanced students waited for attention that would help them progress toward elite capability levels. Private Chen's frustration finally boiled over during a particularly challenging stalking exercise, where recruits were required to infiltrate observation positions without detection and then engage targets at unknown distances. The exercise was designed to test all the skills they had been developing, combining camouflage, movement, range estimation, and precision shooting into a comprehensive evaluation of their progress. Sarah's approach to the exercise was methodical and careful, but her execution appeared amateur from the perspective of observers who didn't understand what they were seeing. She moved slowly and deliberately, taking time to study terrain features and atmospheric conditions that other recruits ignored in their eagerness to demonstrate speed and confidence. Her route selection seemed inefficient, following paths that avoided obvious approaches but required additional time and energy to navigate. When she finally reached her designated position, Sarah's preparation for the shooting phase was exhaustive and systematic. She studied wind indicators, calculated range estimates using multiple techniques, and adjusted her equipment with attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. Other recruits had completed their shots and were already moving to extraction points while Sarah continued her preparation, creating the impression that she was overthinking simple tasks that should have been completed quickly and efficiently. Her first shot missed the target completely, the bullet impacting somewhere in the hillside behind the designated area. The miss was so dramatic that instructors immediately suspected equipment malfunction or fundamental error in setup. Sarah's second attempt also missed, though closer to the target area, suggesting that her adjustments were moving in the correct direction but still inadequate to achieve acceptable accuracy. By the time Sarah had fired her third shot, which finally impacted the target area but well outside acceptable parameters, the exercise had effectively ended for other participants who were waiting for her to complete her sequence. The delay created scheduling problems that affected subsequent training activities, and the frustration among instructors and fellow recruits was palpable. Chen approached Sarah after the exercise with barely controlled anger that reflected weeks of accumulated frustration. "What exactly are you trying to prove here, Mitchell? This is supposed to be an elite training program, not remedial marksmanship for people who can't hit the broadside of a barn. Your performance is dragging down everyone else's progress." Sarah's response was characteristically neutral, revealing no emotion, despite the public nature of the criticism. "I'm working to improve, Chen. I understand the frustration, and I'm committed to meeting program standards." The words were appropriate and professional, but they carried no indication of how she planned to achieve improvement that had eluded her for 6 weeks of intensive training. Chen's frustration escalated into something approaching contempt as she continued her critique. "Working to improve? Mitchell, you've been here for 6 weeks, and you haven't hit a single target at operational distances. Most of us were scoring hits on day 1. At what point do you acknowledge that maybe you're not cut out for this type of work?" The confrontation drew attention from other recruits, who gathered to observe what had become an inevitable collision between top performers and someone whose continued presence seemed to mock the selectivity that made their program meaningful. The dynamics were complex, involving not just frustration with poor performance, but questions about fairness, standards, and the various political considerations that might explain why someone so obviously unsuitable had been allowed to continue training. Thompson joined the discussion with observations that reflected his law enforcement background and understanding of organizational dynamics. "Look, Mitchell, nothing personal, but this program has a reputation to maintain. When we graduate, people are going to assume we're all capable of performing at elite levels. Your presence here suggests that standards have been lowered, and that affects all of us." Sarah listened to the criticism with the same neutral expression she maintained during individual counseling sessions. neither defending herself nor acknowledging the validity of their concerns. Her silence seemed to fuel additional frustration among recruits, who interpreted her lack of response as indifference or arrogance rather than careful emotional control. "Maybe she's got connections," suggested Private David Kumar, a former competitive shooter from Texas who had dominated early training phases with performances that impressed instructors accustomed to working with exceptional marksmen. "You know how these things work. Sometimes people get opportunities they haven't earned because of who they know or what boxes they check on diversity forms." The speculation that followed revealed the various theories that had developed around Sarah's presence in the program. Some recruits suggested that she represented a quota requirement, that her selection had been based on demographic considerations rather than demonstrated ability. Others wondered if she possessed political connections that protected her from normal washout procedures. A few theorized that her continued enrollment served some administrative purpose that wasn't apparent to students focused on training requirements. None of the speculation considered that someone might have compelling reasons for concealing exceptional ability behind a facade of incompetence. The possibility that failure might be more valuable than success in certain circumstances didn't occur to recruits whose military experience had been built on the assumption that excellence should always be demonstrated and recognized. They couldn't imagine why someone would deliberately perform poorly in a program designed to identify and develop elite capabilities. Sarah's routine remained consistent, despite the increasing social isolation that resulted from her poor performance and the frustration it generated among classmates and instructors. She continued to arrive early for training sessions, maintained her equipment to standards that exceeded those of top performers, and studied training materials with intensity that suggested genuine dedication to improvement. Her evening routine included additional practice sessions, using dry-fire techniques and equipment maintenance that went beyond basic requirements. But these extra efforts seemed to produce no measurable improvement in her range performance. If anything, her scores remained consistently poor week after week, creating the impression that she had reached a plateau of incompetence that no amount of additional effort could overcome. The contrast between her obvious dedication and her continued failure became another source of puzzlement for instructors who couldn't understand why increased practice wasn't translating into better results. Hayes found himself reconsidering fundamental assumptions about talent identification and student evaluation as he watched Sarah's continued struggles. His experience suggested that dedicated students with solid theoretical foundations should demonstrate steady improvement over time, even if they started from lower baseline performance levels. Sarah's static scores challenged his understanding of how adult learners typically progressed through skill development phases. The possibility that she was deliberately underperforming never seriously occurred to him, primarily because he couldn't conceive of reasons why someone would sabotage their own training in such a systematic and thorough manner. Military culture emphasized excellence and achievement, creating environments where hiding capabilities served no apparent purpose and potentially harmed career progression and future opportunities. As the 7th week of training began, Sarah's position as the program's worst performer had become so established that it no longer generated surprise or discussion. Her failures were expected, incorporated into training schedules that accounted for the additional time her struggles required. Other recruits had stopped offering advice or encouragement, accepting that her presence was an administrative reality they couldn't change and shouldn't waste energy trying to understand. But Hayes continued to watch her with growing curiosity, noting details that didn't fit the pattern of simple incompetence. Her movement during tactical exercises was more fluid than her scores suggested, her equipment handling more sophisticated than basic training should have produced. Most intriguingly, her eyes during shooting sequences held a focus and intensity that seemed disconnected from the amateur results she consistently produced. Something about Sarah Mitchell didn't add up, and Hayes was beginning to suspect that the answer to her contradictory performance might be more complex than simple inability or inadequate preparation. His instincts, honed through 15 years of evaluating human performance under pressure, suggested that he was missing something important about the quiet woman who had become his program's most puzzling failure. The weekly evaluation meeting brought together all instructors involved in the sniper training program to discuss student progress, identify potential problems, and make recommendations about continued enrollment or remedial training requirements. Sarah Mitchell's name appeared prominently on the agenda, as it had for the previous 6 weeks, generating discussions that reflected the staff's growing frustration with her continued presence in the program. Rodriguez opened the discussion with a summary of her range performance that painted a picture of consistent failure across all measured categories. Mitchell's scores remain in the bottom 5% of any class I've supervised. 6 weeks of training, and she hasn't demonstrated measurable improvement in fundamental marksmanship skills. Her groupings are measured in feet. Her hit probability at operational distances is essentially 0. Hayes added observations about her theoretical knowledge and classroom performance, creating a more complex picture that puzzled everyone involved in her instruction. Her written examinations are exceptional, consistently scoring in the top 10%. Her understanding of ballistics is sophisticated. Her tactical thinking is creative. Her equipment knowledge exceeds that of most instructors. The disconnect between her theoretical understanding and practical application is unlike anything I've encountered. The discussion continued around the conference table as other instructors contributed observations that deepened the puzzle rather than resolving it. Her physical fitness scores were adequate, her discipline exemplary, her attitude professional. She responded well to instruction, asked intelligent questions, and demonstrated dedication that impressed everyone who worked with her. But when evaluated on the fundamental task that defined their program, she performed like someone who had never received professional instruction. Captain Lisa Morgan, the program's commanding officer, reviewed the documentation that had accumulated around Sarah's case while listening to staff discussions that revealed genuine confusion rather than simple frustration. Morgan had been running specialized training programs for 8 years, long enough to understand the various factors that could interfere with student performance. But Sarah Mitchell represented something new in her experience. What's your recommendation, Master Sergeant Hayes? From an instructional standpoint, do you see any evidence that additional training might produce the improvement we need to see? Morgan's question reflected administrative pressures that extended beyond individual student welfare to program reputation and resource allocation considerations. Hayes considered his response carefully, balancing his professional judgment against intuitions that he couldn't substantiate with documented evidence. Ma'am, under normal circumstances, I would recommend remedial training followed by program dismissal if improvement wasn't demonstrated within a reasonable time frame. Mitchell's performance doesn't meet minimum standards for program continuation. He paused, studying the file that contained 6 weeks of documented failure while remembering moments of competence that hadn't translated into measurable results. However, there are aspects of her performance that don't fit standard patterns of inadequacy. Her theoretical understanding is exceptional, her dedication is obvious, and her attention to detail during non-shooting activities is impressive. Something about her case doesn't add up. Morgan nodded with understanding that came from her own observations of the contradictions surrounding Sarah's training performance. What are you suggesting, Master Sergeant? That we continue her enrollment despite consistently poor results because of theoretical knowledge and good attitude? Hayes struggled to articulate concerns that were based more on instinct than evidence, suspicions that might reflect wishful thinking rather than professional judgment. Ma'am, I'm suggesting that we might be missing something important about Mitchell's capabilities. Her pattern of failure is almost too consistent, too complete. Most struggling students show occasional flashes of competence, random successes that indicate underlying potential. Mitchell shows none of that, which suggests either complete inability or something else entirely. The staff meeting concluded with a decision to continue Sarah's enrollment for 1 additional week, while implementing enhanced individual instruction designed to identify and address whatever factors were preventing her from translating knowledge into performance. The decision reflected institutional reluctance to dismiss someone whose theoretical understanding was exceptional, combined with recognition that continued failure couldn't be tolerated indefinitely. Sarah's reaction to news of her probationary status was characteristically neutral, acknowledging the decision without displaying emotion that might reveal her internal response to increased scrutiny. She agreed to additional instruction sessions, expressed appreciation for the opportunity to improve, and committed to meeting whatever standards were established for her continued participation. But that evening, alone in her personal space away from the observation of classmates and instructors, Sarah opened her leather journal and wrote entries that would have shocked anyone who believed her performance accurately reflected her capabilities. The technical content was sophisticated and detailed, reflecting analysis of training scenarios, instructor techniques, and fellow student performance that demonstrated understanding far beyond what her failures suggested. More intriguingly, her journal contained what appeared to be tactical assessments of Fort Williamson's security procedures, detailed observations about staff routines and facility vulnerabilities, and sketches of terrain features that suggested someone conducting systematic reconnaissance rather than simple academic study. The entries revealed a mind that was constantly analyzing, evaluating, and cataloging information in ways that had nothing to do with basic marksmanship instruction. As Sarah prepared for sleep that would be interrupted by dreams of distant mountains and responsibilities she had left behind, she reflected on the complex game she was playing and the various factors that made continued failure more valuable than the success that would have been simple to achieve. Her presence at Fort Williamson served purposes that extended far beyond learning to shoot targets at known distances, purposes that required maintaining careful anonymity behind a facade of earnest incompetence. The morning would bring new challenges and continued scrutiny from instructors who couldn't understand why someone with her apparent dedication performed so poorly when measured against program standards. But Sarah had survived worse than confused trainers and frustrated classmates, had navigated more dangerous situations than military training exercises, and had learned that the most effective operators were often those who appeared least threatening to people who judged capability by surface appearances. Tomorrow would require another performance of failure, another day of missing targets that she could have hit with precision that would have shocked everyone who watched her struggle. The charade was exhausting and demoralizing in ways that real challenges had never been, but it served purposes that made the cost worthwhile. Sarah Mitchell would continue to be the worst shot in training until circumstances required her to be something else entirely. The 8th week of training began with an announcement that changed everything for the remaining recruits at Fort Williamson. Captain Morgan assembled the class in the main briefing room, her expression carrying the weight of administrative decisions that would reshape their remaining time in the program. The morning light filtered through institutional windows, casting shadows across faces that reflected various degrees of anxiety about what news might be coming. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address some concerns that have been raised about program standards and individual performance expectations. Morgan's voice carried the authority of someone who had made difficult decisions throughout her military career, but also the weariness that came from dealing with bureaucratic pressures that sometimes conflicted with sound training principles. Sarah sat in the back row as always, her notebook open and pen ready, maintaining the same attentive posture she had displayed throughout 7 weeks of systematic failure. Around her, other recruits shifted uncomfortably, sensing that changes were coming that might affect their own prospects for successful program completion. The atmosphere held the tension that preceded announcements about policy modifications or individual dismissals. Effective immediately, we're implementing enhanced performance standards that will require all students to demonstrate measurable progress within clearly defined timeframes. Morgan clicked through a presentation that outlined new evaluation criteria, remedial training procedures, and the accelerated timeline that would determine who continued in the program and who returned to their original units with documentation of incomplete training. The changes were sweeping and uncompromising. Students who failed to achieve minimum scores within 2 weeks would be dismissed regardless of theoretical knowledge or other positive indicators. Practical shooting performance would be weighted more heavily than classroom examinations, reflecting operational requirements that prioritize results over understanding. Individual counseling would be replaced by group instruction to maximize efficiency and eliminate the personalized attention that some administrators believed had enabled marginal performers to remain enrolled beyond appropriate timeframes. Chen felt vindicated by the announcement, believing that stricter standards would finally eliminate students whose continued presence diluted the program's reputation for excellence. She exchanged meaningful looks with other top performers who had grown frustrated with training sessions that were slowed by accommodating struggling students. The new policies seemed designed to restore the selectivity that made their achievement meaningful. Thompson nodded with approval that reflected his law enforcement background and understanding of how organizational standards affected institutional credibility. He had watched similar policy changes in civilian agencies, where public pressure and budget constraints forced administrators to prioritize measurable outcomes over individual development. The military's decision to emphasize performance over potential seemed both inevitable and necessary. But Hayes felt uneasy about changes that eliminated flexibility and individual assessment in favor of standardized metrics that might not capture important nuances of student capability. His 15 years of training experience had taught him that exceptional operators sometimes emerged from unconventional backgrounds through developmental processes that didn't follow predictable patterns. The new policies seemed designed more to satisfy administrative concerns than to identify and develop true talent. Master Sergeant Hayes will be conducting individual assessments with students who are currently below program standards, Morgan continued, her gaze briefly meeting Sarah's before moving on to address the group as a whole. These assessments will determine eligibility for continued enrollment under the new performance requirements. Students who don't demonstrate immediate improvement will be processed for return to their original units. The announcement concluded with schedule modifications that intensified training pace while reducing time available for individual instruction and remedial work. Students would face evaluation criteria that measured improvement in absolute terms rather than relative progress, eliminating subjective judgment that might excuse poor performance based on effort or attitude. The message was clear: perform or leave. Sarah's journal entry that evening reflected analysis of the policy changes and their implications for her carefully maintained facade of incompetence. The enhanced scrutiny would make continued failure more difficult to sustain without raising questions about deliberate underperformance rather than simple inability. She would need to adjust her approach while maintaining the fundamental deception that served purposes extending far beyond sniper training. The individual assessment with Hayes was scheduled for Tuesday morning, providing Sarah with time to consider how much improvement she could demonstrate without revealing capabilities that would compromise her larger mission. The balance was delicate, requiring enough progress to avoid immediate dismissal while maintaining performance levels that supported her cover story as a struggling student with limited natural ability. Hayes spent Sunday evening reviewing Sarah's file and preparing for an evaluation session that would determine her future in the program. His instincts continued to suggest that something important was being missed, but administrative pressures required measurable results that either justified continued enrollment or supported dismissal. The new policies eliminated gray areas that had previously allowed instructors to make subjective judgments about student potential. Monday's training sessions proceeded under the intensified schedule with palpable tension among students who understood that their margin for error had been eliminated. Chen dominated the practical exercises with performances that reinforced her position as the class leader, while other top performers pushed themselves to maintain scores that would ensure continued enrollment. The competitive atmosphere became more pronounced as students realized that program completion was no longer guaranteed for anyone who met basic requirements. Sarah's performance during Monday's sessions remained characteristically poor, but observers noted subtle differences in her approach that suggested possible improvement potential. Her equipment setup was more systematic, her pre-shot routine more consistent, and her follow-through more disciplined. The changes were minor and didn't translate into improved scores, but they created the impression that enhanced instruction might produce measurable results. Rodriguez observed these modifications with interest, noting that Sarah seemed to be implementing coaching suggestions that had been offered repeatedly throughout previous weeks. Her trigger control appeared smoother, her breathing more controlled, and her recovery between shots more professional. The improvements were incremental and insufficient to meet program standards, but they represented the first evidence that instruction was being absorbed and applied. "Mitchell's showing some technical improvement," Rodriguez mentioned to Hayes during their evening briefing. "Still not hitting targets, but her fundamentals are cleaning up. Maybe the enhanced instruction approach is starting to work." The observation carried hope that systematic coaching might finally unlock whatever potential Sarah possessed, while acknowledging that substantial progress would be required to justify continued enrollment. Hayes nodded while maintaining reservations about interpreting minor technical improvements as evidence of impending breakthrough performance. His experience suggested that fundamental changes in shooting ability typically occurred more rapidly once students overcame initial barriers, but Sarah's improvements seemed to follow a different pattern that didn't match normal skill development sequences. Tuesday morning arrived with weather conditions that were ideal for precision shooting: minimal wind, good visibility, and stable atmospheric pressure that eliminated variables that could complicate accurate assessment of student ability. Hayes had selected a comprehensive evaluation protocol that would test all aspects of marksmanship training, while providing multiple opportunities for Sarah to demonstrate whatever capabilities she possessed. The assessment began with basic position shooting at known distances, progressing through increasingly challenging scenarios that would reveal both technical competence and tactical understanding. Hayes had structured the session to build confidence through initial success before advancing to more demanding requirements that separated competent shooters from exceptional ones. Sarah approached the evaluation with the same methodical preparation she brought to all training activities, but Hayes noted increased intensity in her pre-shooting routine that suggested genuine concern about the outcome. Her equipment check was more thorough than usual, her position selection more deliberate, and her mental preparation more focused. The changes were subtle, but indicated that she understood the stakes associated with this assessment. The first series of shots at 100 yards produced results that were marginally better than Sarah's previous performance, with impacts clustering closer to the target center while remaining outside acceptable parameters for program standards. Hayes observed her technique carefully, noting trigger control that was textbook perfect and breathing patterns that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of physiological factors affecting accuracy. Better, Mitchell. Your fundamentals are improving. Let's see how you handle the 200-yard targets. Hayes made notes on his evaluation form while maintaining encouraging tone that might help build confidence necessary for improved performance. His observations documented technical progress, while acknowledging that substantial improvement would be required to meet minimum standards. Sarah's performance at increased distance followed the same pattern of marginal improvement that fell short of acceptable standards. Her shots impacted closer to the scoring zones than previous attempts, suggesting that coaching was being absorbed, but the groupings remained too large for operational requirements. Hayes noted increased consistency in her shooting process while documenting continued failure to achieve qualifying scores. The evaluation continued through various shooting positions and distances, with Sarah demonstrating incremental improvements across all measured categories. Her prone shooting was more stable, her sitting position more consistent, and her standing shots less erratic than previous efforts. The progress was measurable but insufficient, creating a complex picture of someone who was clearly learning but remained far from competent performance levels. Hayes found himself torn between professional judgment that required dismissing students who failed to meet established standards and intuitive sense that Sarah possessed potential that hadn't been properly accessed through conventional instruction methods. Her technical improvements were real and significant from a developmental standpoint, but they didn't translate into the dramatic performance gains that would justify continued enrollment under the new policies. Mitchell, you're showing definite improvement in fundamental techniques, but your scores remain below minimum standards, Hayes explained during their post-assessment discussion. Help me understand what's happening here. Your setup is better, your process is more consistent, but you're still not hitting targets at operational distances. What do you think is preventing you from translating these improvements into better results? Sarah's response reflected careful consideration of how much truth she could reveal without compromising her cover story. Master Sergeant, I feel like I'm making progress in understanding the techniques, but something isn't clicking when it comes to actual performance. Maybe it's mental pressure or concentration issues. I'm committed to continued improvement and meeting program standards. Hayes studied her expression, noting composure that seemed at odds with the anxiety that typically accompanied poor performance and potential dismissal. Most struggling students displayed emotional reactions that reflected genuine concern about their future, but Sarah maintained the same neutral professionalism she had demonstrated throughout her enrollment. Her demeanor suggested someone who was disappointed but not devastated by continued failure. Let's try something different, Hayes decided, departing from his planned evaluation protocol to attempt an approach that might reveal factors affecting her performance. I want you to talk me through your shooting process step by step. Explain what you're thinking about, what you're focusing on, how you're making decisions about aim and trigger press. Maybe we can identify specific issues that are causing problems. Sarah's verbal description of her shooting process revealed sophisticated understanding of precision marksmanship that exceeded her demonstrated ability by several orders of magnitude. She discussed sight alignment with the precision of an experienced competitor, described trigger control with technical accuracy that impressed Hayes, and analyzed atmospheric factors with expertise that suggested advanced training beyond basic instruction. The disconnect between her theoretical knowledge and practical application became even more puzzling, as Sarah demonstrated comprehensive understanding of concepts that typically required years of experience to master. Her discussion of ballistics was sophisticated, her awareness of environmental factors comprehensive, and her analysis of shooting positions tactically sound. She spoke like an expert while performing like a beginner. Hayes concluded the assessment with growing conviction that Sarah Mitchell represented something unusual that didn't fit standard patterns of student development or failure. Her combination of advanced knowledge and poor performance created contradictions that challenged his understanding of how adult learners typically progressed through skill acquisition phases. Something about her case suggested factors that weren't apparent through conventional evaluation methods. The written report Hayes submitted to Captain Morgan documented Sarah's technical improvements while acknowledging continued failure to meet minimum performance standards. His recommendations reflected professional obligation to uphold program standards, while noting unusual circumstances that might warrant additional consideration. The report avoided speculation about possible explanations for her contradictory performance while presenting facts that administrators could use to make informed decisions. Morgan reviewed the assessment results while considering administrative pressures that required clear decisions about student retention or dismissal. Sarah's case represented the kind of borderline situation that the new policies were designed to eliminate, removing subjective judgment from decisions that should be based on measurable performance standards. The documentation supported dismissal while raising questions that might justify continued enrollment under exceptional circumstances. The decision meeting included Morgan, Hayes, and Rodriguez, with input from other instructors who had observed Sarah's performance throughout her enrollment. The discussion revealed genuine disagreement about how to interpret assessment results that showed improvement without meeting established standards, creating the kind of administrative dilemma that the new policies were intended to prevent. Her technical progress is documented and significant, Hayes argued, presenting evidence of improvement across multiple measurement categories. Mitchell is clearly absorbing instruction and implementing coaching suggestions. The question is whether we allow additional time for these improvements to translate into qualifying performance, or whether we enforce standards that require immediate results. Rodriguez supported Hayes' assessment while acknowledging the challenges created by Sarah's continued poor performance. She's definitely getting better at the fundamentals, but 8 weeks is a long time to invest in someone who still can't hit targets at basic operational distances. At some point, improvement potential has to translate into actual results. Morgan weighed the arguments while considering broader implications of decisions that would establish precedents for future cases involving marginal performers. The new policies emphasized accountability and measurable results, but they also eliminated flexibility that might allow exceptional cases to be handled individually rather than through standardized procedures. What's your professional judgment about her potential for achieving program standards within a reasonable time frame? Morgan asked Hayes, seeking assessment that balanced optimism with realistic expectations. If we invest additional resources in her training, what's the probability that she'll eventually meet minimum requirements? Hayes considered the question carefully, weighing documented improvements against continued failure to achieve basic competency standards. Ma'am, under normal circumstances, I would say her potential is limited and additional training unlikely to produce qualifying results. But there are aspects of Mitchell's case that don't fit normal patterns, suggesting that we might be missing important factors affecting her performance. The discussion continued for another hour, with various perspectives presented and analyzed in the context of program requirements and administrative expectations. Sarah's case generated more debate than typical student assessments, reflecting genuine uncertainty about how to interpret results that showed progress without meeting standards. Morgan's decision reflected compromise between institutional requirements and recognition that exceptional cases sometimes required individual consideration. Sarah would be granted 1 additional week of intensive individual instruction, with clear performance benchmarks that would determine her continued enrollment or dismissal from the program. The decision provided opportunity for improvement while establishing non-negotiable standards that would guide final evaluation. Sarah received notification of the decision through official channels that emphasized both the opportunity being provided and the requirements that would determine her future in the program. Her response was characteristically professional, expressing appreciation for continued enrollment while acknowledging understanding of performance expectations that would guide final assessment. But her journal entry that evening revealed calculations and concerns that would have surprised anyone who believed her official response reflected her complete reaction to the decision. The additional scrutiny would require even more careful management of her performance, balancing demonstrated improvement with continued failure to achieve levels that would compromise her larger mission. The intensive individual instruction began Wednesday morning, with Hayes implementing specialized techniques designed to address whatever psychological or technical factors might be preventing Sarah from translating knowledge into performance. His approach combined traditional marksmanship training with stress inoculation and confidence-building exercises intended to overcome barriers that conventional instruction hadn't addressed. Sarah participated in the enhanced training with apparent dedication while managing the complex challenge of showing progress without revealing capabilities that would raise questions about her previous performance. The balance required careful calibration, demonstrating enough improvement to justify continued enrollment while maintaining fundamental deception about her true abilities. Hayes noted immediate improvements in Sarah's shooting process that suggested enhanced instruction was addressing factors that had been limiting her performance. Her pre-shot routine became more consistent, her trigger control smoother, and her follow-through more disciplined. The changes were systematic and significant, creating optimism that breakthrough performance might be achievable within the established timeframe. Wednesday's session produced groupings that were noticeably better than previous efforts, though still outside qualifying parameters. Sarah's shots clustered more consistently around the target center, suggesting that instruction was having positive effects on her shooting precision. The improvements were measurable and encouraging, providing evidence that continued training might eventually produce acceptable results. Thursday's instruction built on previous days' progress, with exercises designed to reinforce positive changes while addressing remaining deficiencies in Sarah's performance. Hayes implemented stress shooting scenarios intended to evaluate whether improvements would hold up under pressure that simulated operational conditions. Sarah's response to these challenges would provide crucial information about her readiness for program continuation. The stress shooting exercises revealed interesting patterns in Sarah's performance that puzzled Hayes while providing additional evidence of improvement potential. Under pressure, her shooting became more focused rather than less controlled, suggesting mental discipline that exceeded what her previous performance had indicated. Her groupings actually improved during timed exercises that typically degraded performance among struggling students. "That's better, Mitchell. You're showing real progress under pressure, which is unusual for someone at your skill level," Hayes observed, noting technical improvements that seemed to accelerate when stress was applied, rather than decrease as would normally be expected. "Most students struggle more under time constraints, but you seem to perform better when challenged." Sarah's response revealed nothing about the reasons for her unusual response to pressure while maintaining her cover story as someone struggling to master basic skills. "Thank you, Master Sergeant. I feel like I'm starting to understand how to apply the techniques we've been working on. The pressure helps me focus on fundamentals rather than overthinking the process." Hayes filed away the observation while continuing with exercises designed to evaluate Sarah's progress across various performance indicators. Her response to stress was definitely unusual for someone with her documented skill level, suggesting either exceptional mental discipline or experience that her background didn't indicate. The contradiction added to the growing list of factors that didn't fit conventional patterns of student development. Friday's final assessment would determine Sarah's future in the program under the enhanced performance standards that eliminated subjective interpretation of student potential. Hayes structured the evaluation to provide multiple opportunities for Sarah to demonstrate whatever capability she possessed while maintaining fairness that could support administrative decisions, regardless of the outcome. The assessment protocol included shooting at various distances and positions, with clear performance standards that would determine program continuation or dismissal. Sarah would have no opportunity to claim unfair evaluation or inadequate testing, creating conditions that would either justify continued enrollment through measurable results or support dismissal through documented failure to meet established requirements. Sarah approached the final assessment with intensity that was new to her training performance, suggesting either genuine concern about the outcome or commitment to demonstrating improvement that would support her continued enrollment. Hayes noted increased focus in her preparation routine while maintaining professional detachment that would ensure objective evaluation regardless of his personal inclinations about her potential. The morning air was crisp and still, providing ideal conditions for precision shooting that eliminated environmental variables that might affect accuracy assessment. Sarah's equipment was prepared with meticulous attention to detail, her shooting position selected with tactical awareness that demonstrated understanding of factors affecting precision marksmanship. Everything suggested that she was prepared to perform at whatever level she was capable of achieving. Hayes recorded the time and began the evaluation that would determine Sarah Mitchell's future at Fort Williamson, unaware that he was about to witness a transformation that would challenge everything he thought he understood about human performance, training effectiveness, and the various reasons why someone might choose to conceal exceptional ability behind carefully maintained facade of failure. The first shot cracked across the range with authority that was different from Sarah's previous attempts, the sound carrying certainty rather than hesitation. Hayes lowered his binoculars with surprise that he struggled to conceal, as the spotting scope revealed impact that was dramatically better than anything Sarah had achieved during 8 weeks of training. The improvement was so significant that he initially suspected equipment malfunction or measurement error, but the second shot confirmed what the first had suggested: placing another round within parameters that represented not just improvement, but competence that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Hayes found himself witnessing a performance transformation that defied explanation through conventional understanding of skill development and learning curves. Sarah Mitchell was suddenly shooting like someone with capabilities that her previous performance had never suggested. The assessment continued with results that grew progressively more impressive as Sarah demonstrated shooting ability that exceeded not just her previous efforts, but the performance of students who had been dominating training exercises throughout the program. Her groupings were tight, her scores consistently high, and her technique refined to levels that typically required years of experience to develop. Hayes struggled to maintain professional composure while documenting results that challenged his understanding of human capability and training effectiveness. Sarah Mitchell, the program's worst performer for 8 weeks, was suddenly demonstrating marksmanship skills that placed her among the most capable shooters he had ever supervised. The transformation was so complete and dramatic that it raised questions about everything he thought he knew about her background, her previous performance, and the various factors that might explain such extraordinary improvement. But even as he recorded scores that justified continued enrollment and suggested exceptional potential, Hayes sensed that he was witnessing something more complex than simple breakthrough performance. Sarah's shooting displayed characteristics that indicated advanced training beyond basic instruction, experience that suggested professional development rather than recent learning, and tactical awareness that reflected operational background rather than academic study. The woman who had missed targets at 300 yards for 8 weeks was now placing shots with precision that demonstrated master-level capability at distances that challenged even experienced marksmen. The contradiction between her previous failure and current performance suggested possibilities that Hayes wasn't sure he was prepared to consider, implications that might extend far beyond simple training assessment and program enrollment decisions. Hayes stood frozen behind his spotting scope, watching Sarah Mitchell place her 15th consecutive shot into a grouping that measured less than 2 inches at 500 yards. The mathematical impossibility of such dramatic improvement made him question his own eyesight, his equipment, even his sanity. 8 weeks of documented failure had been replaced by shooting that exceeded the capability of Olympic-level competitors. Sarah's breathing remained controlled and steady as she worked the bolt with mechanical precision, each movement flowing into the next with practiced efficiency that spoke of muscle memory developed over years rather than hours. Her body position hadn't changed from previous sessions, but something fundamental had shifted in the way she interfaced with the rifle, as if invisible barriers had suddenly dissolved. The 16th shot impacted within a finger's width of the previous round, maintaining a consistency that Hayes had rarely witnessed even among the most experienced marksmen he had trained. Sarah's follow-through was textbook perfect, her recovery immediate, her preparation for the next shot systematic and unhurried. She was shooting like someone who had been suppressing extraordinary ability rather than developing basic competence. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Freeman arrived at the range unannounced, drawn by radio chatter about unusual performance during routine evaluations. Freeman commanded the Special Operations Training Division and possessed enough experience to recognize exceptional shooting when she witnessed it. Her presence at a basic sniper assessment suggested that word of Sarah's transformation had already reached levels of command that typically remained uninvolved in individual student evaluations. Freeman positioned herself behind a separate spotting scope, confirming Hayes's observations while making her own assessments of what she was witnessing. Sarah's performance continued without acknowledging the additional scrutiny, each shot placed with deliberate precision that demonstrated complete mastery of environmental factors, ballistic calculations, and mechanical execution. "Master Sergeant," Freeman said quietly, "how long has Mitchell been shooting at this level?" Her question carried implications that extended beyond training assessment to operational capabilities and background verification procedures. Students didn't typically develop such extraordinary ability during basic instruction courses. Hayes struggled to formulate a response that accurately reflected the surreal nature of what they were observing. "Ma'am, this is the first time Mitchell has demonstrated anything approaching competent performance. 8 weeks of training, and she hasn't hit a target at 300 yards until today. Now she's placing shots at 500 with precision that exceeds program standards by significant margins. Freeman studied Sarah through her scope while processing information that challenged standard assumptions about skill development and training effectiveness. The woman she was watching demonstrated capabilities that typically required years of professional development, yet her training records indicated consistent failure until this single assessment session. Sarah completed her 20th shot, maintaining grouping dimensions that would have impressed competitive shooters with decades of experience. She cleared her rifle with practiced efficiency before turning to face the instructors who had been documenting her performance with growing amazement. Her expression remained neutral, revealing none of the satisfaction that such extraordinary shooting should have generated. "Mitchell," Hayes called out, his voice carrying confusion rather than congratulation, "explain to me what just happened here." 20 shots, sub-minute of angle accuracy at 500 yards, after 8 weeks of missing targets at half that distance. Help me understand how someone improves that dramatically in a single session. Sarah approached the instructor station with the same measured pace she had maintained throughout her enrollment, showing no indication that she had just demonstrated shooting that would qualify her for any precision marksmanship program in the military. Her demeanor suggested someone completing routine training rather than achieving breakthrough performance that defied explanation. "Master Sergeant, I feel like the instruction finally clicked. All the techniques you've been teaching started working together properly," Sarah replied, her response revealing nothing about the true nature of her capabilities, while maintaining her cover story as a struggling student who had finally achieved success through dedicated training. Freeman stepped forward, her rank and position commanding immediate attention from both Sarah and Hayes. "Mitchell, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Freeman from Special Operations Training Division. I need to ask you some questions about your background and previous experience with precision shooting. Your performance today suggests training that goes beyond basic instruction." Sarah's response to Freeman's authority was professionally appropriate, but carefully guarded, acknowledging rank while revealing minimal additional information about her background or capabilities. "Ma'am, my civilian experience was primarily hunting and outdoor recreation. I've been working hard to apply the instruction I've received here at Fort Williamson." Freeman wasn't satisfied with responses that failed to explain the extraordinary improvement she had witnessed. Her experience with special operations personnel had taught her to recognize evasion disguised as cooperation, and Sarah's answers carried all the characteristics of someone providing partial truth while concealing significant information. "Mitchell, hunting experience doesn't typically produce the level of precision I just observed. Your shooting demonstrates advanced training in long-range marksmanship, environmental assessment, and stress management. These are skills that require professional instruction and extensive practice under controlled conditions." The questioning continued for another 20 minutes, with Freeman systematically probing Sarah's background while Sarah deflected each inquiry with responses that appeared forthcoming while revealing nothing substantial. The dynamic created tension that was obvious to Hayes, who found himself witnessing an interrogation disguised as performance evaluation. Sarah maintained her composure throughout the questioning, neither confirming nor denying implications about advanced training while sticking to her official background story. Her responses were consistent with her personnel file, but failed to explain capabilities that Freeman clearly recognized as exceeding typical civilian experience. Freeman concluded the questioning with instructions for Sarah to report to her office the following morning for additional background verification and capability assessment. The directive carried weight that suggested Sarah's extraordinary performance had triggered official interest that extended beyond routine training evaluation. As Sarah departed the range, Freeman and Hayes remained behind to discuss implications of what they had witnessed and the various administrative actions that might be required to address questions about student background verification and security clearance procedures. "Master Sergeant, in your professional opinion, was Mitchell deliberately underperforming during previous training sessions?" Freeman's question addressed suspicions that had been building throughout the assessment, implications that a student might have reasons for concealing exceptional ability rather than demonstrating it. Hayes considered the question carefully, weighing documented evidence against intuitive concerns that had been troubling him throughout Sarah's enrollment. "Ma'am, the consistency of her failure was unusual. Most struggling students show occasional flashes of competence, random successes that indicate underlying potential. Mitchell showed none of that until today, which suggests either complete inability or deliberate suppression of capability." Freeman nodded with understanding that came from experience with personnel who possessed reasons for maintaining cover stories and concealing operational backgrounds. "Her shooting today was an improvement, Master Sergeant. That was revelation of existing capability." Someone with that level of precision has been training regularly and recently. This isn't residual skill from civilian hunting experience. The implications of Freeman's assessment extended beyond individual student evaluation to questions about security procedures, background verification, and the various reasons why someone might seek enrollment in military training while concealing advanced capabilities. Sarah Mitchell represented a puzzle that might require investigation at levels that typically remained uninvolved in routine training operations. Word of Sarah's dramatic transformation spread through Fort Williamson with the speed that accompanied truly extraordinary events. Other recruits heard conflicting reports about their worst-performing classmates suddenly demonstrating master-level shooting, creating confusion and skepticism among students who had witnessed her failures throughout 8 weeks of training. Chen's reaction reflected disbelief, mixed with frustration about the implications for program credibility and individual achievement recognition. If Sarah possessed exceptional ability all along, then her previous failures represented deception that had wasted instructional time and resources while creating false impressions about relative student capability. "It doesn't make sense," Chen complained to Thompson during their evening discussion about the day's events. "Nobody improves that dramatically in a single session. If Mitchell could shoot like that all along, why did she pretend to be incompetent for 8 weeks? What was the point of fooling everyone?" Thompson's law enforcement background provided perspective on possible motivations for concealing capability, though he struggled to understand why someone would infiltrate military training while suppressing skills that would have ensured immediate success and recognition. Maybe she was testing the program, evaluating instruction methods or security procedures. Some agencies use undercover personnel to assess training effectiveness. The speculation continued among students who tried to reconcile their direct observations of Sarah's failures with reports of extraordinary performance that seemed to emerge from nowhere. The contradiction challenged their understanding of skill development, while raising questions about the various factors that might motivate someone to maintain false identity throughout extended training. Kumar suggested that Sarah might have been recovering from injury or psychological trauma that had temporarily affected her shooting ability, allowing natural capability to emerge once healing was complete. His theory provided plausible explanation for improvement without requiring deception, though it didn't account for the systematic nature of her previous failures. Rodriguez found himself reviewing 8 weeks of training documentation, searching for indicators he might have missed that could explain Sarah's hidden capabilities. Her equipment maintenance had been exceptional, her theoretical knowledge advanced, her tactical awareness sophisticated. The signs had been present throughout her enrollment, but they had been overshadowed by shooting performance that seemed to contradict every other indicator of competence. The training schedule for the following week was modified to include comprehensive evaluation of Sarah's capabilities across all program requirements, reflecting administrative recognition that her case required special attention beyond routine student assessment. Freeman had authorized testing that would determine not just her current ability level, but the extent of her background training and potential operational experience. Sarah spent the evening alone as always, but her journal entries reflected concerns about increased scrutiny that would make maintaining her cover story more difficult. Freeman's questioning had been professional but persistent, suggesting suspicions about her background that might trigger formal investigation if not carefully managed. The complex game she had been playing for 8 weeks was entering a new phase that would require different strategies for protecting information that couldn't be revealed without compromising missions that extended far beyond sniper training. Her extraordinary performance had been necessary to avoid dismissal, but it had also created a tension that threatened the anonymity she needed to maintain. She opened her secure communication device for the first time since arriving at Fort Williamson, sending a brief message that would alert her handlers to developing complications in her assignment. The response came within minutes, providing guidance that confirmed her suspicions about the delicate nature of her situation and the importance of maintaining operational security, despite increased administrative scrutiny. The message contained instructions for managing the investigation that would inevitably follow Freeman's interest in her background, along with contingency procedures that could be implemented if her cover story became untenable. Sarah's mission at Fort Williamson served purposes that the training staff couldn't understand, purposes that made her continued enrollment more important than avoiding questions about her capabilities. Freeman spent her evening reviewing classified databases that might contain information about Sarah Mitchell's real identity and background, utilizing access privileges that extended beyond routine personnel verification to operational security concerns. The woman she had observed shooting demonstrated capabilities that suggested professional training at levels that required security clearance and specialized assignment authority. Her search revealed gaps in Sarah's background documentation that were subtle, but significant to someone trained to identify fabricated histories and manufactured identities. The timeline of her civilian employment contained inconsistencies, her references provided information that was accurate, but incomplete, and her transition to military service followed patterns that suggested official coordination rather than individual decision-making. Freeman's suspicions were confirmed when her queries triggered automatic notifications from agencies that monitored access to certain classified information. Sarah Mitchell was someone's operational asset, and Freeman's investigation had activated security protocols that protected information she wasn't authorized to access despite her position and clearance level. The realization that Sarah was likely an undercover operative changed Freeman's perspective on the situation and the appropriate administrative response to her extraordinary performance. Instead of security threat requiring investigation, Sarah represented operational asset requiring protection and support for whatever mission had brought her to Fort Williamson. Freeman modified her planned approach for the following day's meeting, shifting from interrogation mode to professional courtesy that acknowledged shared commitment to operational security while seeking information that could guide appropriate administrative actions. Sarah's cover story would be respected, but Freeman needed to understand enough about her real purpose to avoid interfering with legitimate operations. Hayes received notification that his assessment report should emphasize Sarah's dramatic improvement while avoiding speculation about the reasons for her previous poor performance. The guidance came through channels that suggested administrative recognition of sensitive factors affecting her case, though no specific information was provided about the nature of those factors. The morning brought renewed focus on comprehensive evaluation of Sarah's capabilities, but the atmosphere had shifted from routine student assessment to something approaching professional recognition of exceptional ability. Freeman's involvement had elevated Sarah's case beyond training administration to operational considerations that required careful handling. Sarah reported to Freeman's office with the understanding that her carefully maintained facade was being tested by someone who possessed both the authority and expertise to penetrate cover stories that might fool routine administrative review. The meeting would determine whether her mission could continue under current circumstances or whether contingency procedures would need to be implemented. Freeman greeted Sarah with professional courtesy that acknowledged their shared commitment to operational objectives while recognizing the constraints that prevented complete transparency about individual assignments and organizational affiliations. The conversation would need to balance security requirements with administrative needs in ways that protected both Sarah's mission and Freeman's institutional responsibilities. Mitchell, I want to be clear that I respect whatever constraints you're operating under regarding background information, Freeman began, establishing parameters that allowed discussion without requiring revelation of classified details. My concern is ensuring that your training objectives are met while maintaining appropriate program standards and security procedures. Sarah's response reflected relief that Freeman understood the complexity of her situation while maintaining official commitment to her cover story. Ma'am, I appreciate your understanding. I'm committed to completing the training program successfully while meeting all requirements and standards. The discussion that followed revealed Freeman's sophisticated understanding of operational security requirements and her willingness to accommodate special circumstances without compromising program integrity or creating precedents that might affect other students. Sarah's extraordinary shooting would be documented and evaluated appropriately, but questions about her background would be handled through channels that respected classification requirements. Freeman concluded the meeting with assurance that Sarah's enrollment would continue under modified assessment procedures that recognized her demonstrated capabilities while protecting operational considerations that couldn't be discussed in routine administrative contexts. The arrangement satisfied both institutional requirements and security considerations that governed Sarah's assignment. As Sarah returned to training activities, she carried with her the knowledge that her cover story had survived official scrutiny, while her mission objectives remained achievable. Freeman's professional handling of the situation had prevented exposure, while allowing her to demonstrate capabilities necessary for program completion. The afternoon brought advanced training exercises that would test Sarah's newly revealed abilities against standards that reflected her true capability level rather than fabricated incompetence. For the first time since arriving at Fort Williamson, she could perform at levels that matched her actual training and experience, bringing relief that was tempered by recognition that increased scrutiny would require continued careful management of her public persona. Hayes observed Sarah's performance during advanced exercises with fascination that reflected his understanding that he was witnessing capabilities that exceeded typical training program scope. Her shooting demonstrated mastery that typically required years of professional development, but her tactical knowledge suggested operational experience that extended beyond marksmanship into areas that implied specialized assignment history. The transformation was complete, but the mystery had deepened in ways that would influence training procedures and administrative policies long after Sarah completed her enrollment at Fort Williamson. 3 months after Sarah's dramatic revelation at Fort Williamson, Master Sergeant Hayes received an encrypted message that would forever change his understanding of military training and operational security. The brief communication contained coordinates for a remote location in Afghanistan, where an unnamed sniper had eliminated 37 Taliban fighters during a coordinated rescue operation that saved an entire diplomatic convoy from certain destruction. The official after-action report credited the successful mission to exceptional marksmanship from an unidentified asset positioned at extreme range under adverse conditions. Hayes recognized the shooting pattern immediately: 37 consecutive kills without a single miss, executed with precision that defied mathematical probability. Sarah Mitchell had finally revealed the true purpose behind her carefully orchestrated deception at Fort Williamson. Chen graduated as class valedictorian with scores that earned her immediate assignment to Special Operations Command, but she never forgot the quiet woman who had transformed from worst performer to legend in a single afternoon. Years later, serving as a sniper instructor herself, Chen would tell students about the importance of recognizing that excellence sometimes wore masks of mediocrity for reasons that extended beyond individual ambition or recognition. Hayes kept Sarah's training documentation in a secure file that served as a reminder about the complexity of human capability and the various motivations that drove people to conceal exceptional abilities behind facades of ordinary competence. He had learned that the most dangerous operators were often those who appeared least threatening, and that true expertise didn't require announcement to be effective. Freeman received a commendation for her handling of Sarah's case, though the specific details remained classified at levels that prevented public recognition of her professional judgment in protecting operational security while maintaining institutional integrity. The incident became a case study in advanced courses about balancing administrative requirements with operational necessities. Rodriguez modified his instruction techniques to include greater awareness of students who might possess hidden capabilities, teaching other drill sergeants to look beyond surface performance to identify subtle indicators of suppressed competence. His experience with Sarah had taught him that exceptional operators sometimes chose anonymity over recognition for reasons that served larger purposes. Thompson and Kumar completed their sniper training with enhanced appreciation for the complexity of military operations and the various roles that individuals played in missions they might never fully understand. Their conversations about Sarah's transformation became legendary among subsequent classes, inspiring students to question assumptions about capability and motivation. The wooden box that Sarah had kept during her time at Fort Williamson was eventually discovered by base security personnel, containing items that confirmed suspicions about her real identity, while revealing the personal cost of her service to operational objectives that required sacrificing individual recognition for collective security. Sarah's journal entries, when finally declassified decades later, provided insight into the psychological challenges of maintaining cover identities while serving missions that demanded suppressing natural abilities for extended periods. Her documentation of the training program served intelligence purposes that improved security procedures at military installations worldwide. Fort Williamson's sniper training program implemented new evaluation protocols that acknowledged the possibility of students operating under special circumstances, creating procedures that balanced program standards with operational security requirements. Sarah's case had revealed gaps in assessment methods that failed to account for legitimate reasons to conceal exceptional capability. Freeman eventually rose to command Special Operations Training Division, where she implemented policies that protected undercover operatives while maintaining institutional integrity and training effectiveness. Her experience with Sarah had taught her that effective security sometimes required accepting incomplete information about student backgrounds and motivations. Hayes continued training exceptional marksmen for another decade before retiring with full military honors, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that his instincts about human potential had been validated by one of the most extraordinary cases in training history. He never learned Sarah's real name or full mission details, but he understood that her brief presence at Fort Williamson had served purposes that extended far beyond individual skill development. The memorial wall at Fort Williamson includes a small plaque dedicated to, quote, unknown heroes who served with honor, a tribute that Hayes insisted be installed to acknowledge operatives like Sarah who sacrificed recognition for operational success. The inscription reads simply, "Excellence needs no announcement, only application." Sarah Mitchell's real identity remained classified, but her influence on military training doctrine and operational security procedures lasted for generations. Students who learned about the mysterious sniper who had posed as an incompetent recruit understood that true strength often disguised itself as weakness, and that the most effective warriors were frequently those who chose service over glory. The 37 consecutive kills in Afghanistan became legendary within special operations communities, though the shooter's identity was never officially confirmed. Hayes knew the truth but carried it silently, understanding that some secrets were more powerful when preserved than when revealed. Years later, when Hayes encountered exceptional students who seemed to underperform despite obvious capability, he remembered Sarah's lessons about the complexity of human motivation and the various reasons why people chose to hide their strengths rather than display them. His teaching improved because he had learned to look beyond surface performance to recognize hidden potential. The story of the worst shot who became a legend lived on in military folklore, inspiring future generations to question assumptions about capability and to understand that excellence took many forms, not all of which required public recognition or institutional validation. Sarah had proven that true mastery lay not in impressing observers, but in serving purposes larger than individual achievement. Freeman's final report on the incident concluded with observations that became fundamental principles in special operations training. The most dangerous enemies are those who appear harmless, and the most valuable assets are often those who choose anonymity over acclaim. Operational effectiveness requires recognizing that excellence serves many masters, not all of which demand public acknowledgement. Sarah's legacy at Fort Williamson lived on through modified training procedures that respected operational security while maintaining program integrity, creating balance between institutional requirements and individual circumstances that served larger strategic objectives. Her brief enrollment had transformed institutional understanding of student assessment and capability evaluation. The range where Sarah had finally revealed her abilities was renamed the Mitchell Memorial Range, though few people understood the significance of the dedication or the remarkable story behind the nameplate. Hayes ensured that the range served as a reminder that extraordinary capability could emerge from unexpected sources when circumstances demanded truth over deception. Chen, now a colonel herself, often wondered what had become of the mysterious woman who had taught her that excellence didn't always announce itself through obvious demonstrations of competence. Sarah's transformation had influenced Chen's own leadership style, making her more attentive to hidden potential among the soldiers she commanded. The encrypted message that had revealed Sarah's true accomplishments remained Hayes's most treasured possession, proof that his instincts about human capability had been correct. Despite administrative pressure to dismiss someone whose performance seemed to contradict every indicator of competence, he had learned to trust observation over documentation, potential over performance. Sarah Mitchell had disappeared into classified operations as quietly as she had arrived at Fort Williamson, leaving behind only questions and a transformed understanding of what it meant to serve with honor. Her story became a reminder that true heroes often worked in shadows, achieving extraordinary results without seeking recognition or reward. The lesson she had taught through her carefully orchestrated deception became fundamental doctrine in special operations training. Judge slowly, observe carefully, and remember that the most powerful weapons in military arsenals were often disguised as ordinary people serving extraordinary purposes with quiet dedication and professional humility. Her legacy lived on in every student who learned that excellence required no audience, only commitment to missions that served purposes larger than individual ambition or recognition. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.